Hello viewers, welcome to True Crime Diaries. This is your Chris Barker. Christopher Carl Reagan, 53, was a divorced father of adult children, a U.S. Air Force veteran, and a responsible, hardworking man. He intended to relocate from Iron River, Michigan, to Asheville, North Carolina, in the fall of 2014, to begin a new job and repair a strained relationship with his son, Christopher Reagan Jr. On October 15, 2014, he had an appointment to complete a pre-hire drug screening for his new job. He never arrived. The truth would lead investigators and Chris's loved ones down a dark and twisty path, revealing dark secrets. The following is the account of the Iron River Murder Pact. Christopher Reagan was a man of integrity. He was 53 years old, divorced, and had adult children. He had a strained relationship with his sons in the past, but he was mending those bonds through daily text messages and phone calls. Chris retired from the United States Air Force after 20 years of service. Chris Reagan relocated to Iron River, Michigan to be with Terry after reconnecting with an old flame. He got a job as a supervisor with Oldenburg Group. The firm produced defense and mining equipment. Terry and Chris's relationship was short-lived, and they divorced in April 2014. However, the two remained close friends and spoke frequently. Chris intended to leave Michigan's Upper Peninsula and begin a new life in Asheville, North Carolina. He'd been talking about it with his son, Chris Reagan Jr., who was also thinking about moving to Asheville to live with his father. Chris had even secured a job in Asheville and was planning to relocate in late October or early November of 2014. Terry reported to Iron River Police in late October that she had not heard from or seen Chris in nearly 2 weeks, since October 14th. Terry's statement was taken and she was escorted to Chris's apartment by the sergeant on duty. Investigators suspected Chris was packing to leave because the apartment was in disarray. Chris was nowhere to be found. Terry also mentioned seeing Chris's car parked at a park and ride near Iron River. They searched the car and discovered several personal items, including a knee brace that Chris frequently used. Chris is still missing. Iron River is a small town in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, near the Wisconsin border. The area is rural, full of abandoned mines, and the community is fairly isolated. The police force consists of fewer than a half-dozen officers. Laura Frizzo was the chief of police in the fall of 2014. Laura was immediately drawn into the search for Chris Reagan. The investigation would be a highlight of her career, but it would also have unexpected personal consequences. Given the small department and lack of resources in Iron River, the Michigan State Police were asked to assist with the investigation almost immediately. The investigators began by looking into the missing man's personal life. His ex-wife had not communicated with him in several years. His sons, who lived on the other side of Michigan, communicated with him on a regular basis via text messaging and phone calls. Chris Reagan Jr. reported that his father did not complete their relocation to Asheville and stopped returning phone calls and messages after October 14, 2014. None of the man's family members were suspected. Terry was scrutinized by the Michigan State Police. She was, by her own admission, Chris's ex-girlfriend. She could have been upset about the breakup or envious of other women the man was talking to. Chief Frizzo, on the other hand, believed the woman was genuinely upset about her disappearance and was very cooperative with the investigation. Terry was not involved in the disappearance, her gut told her. Chris' workplace was discovered during the investigation. Chris was a company supervisor and, according to the human resources manager, a model employee. He was never late and never failed to show up for work. They knew Chris had a planned day off on October 15th, but they couldn't figure out why he didn't show up for work on the 16th. However, there had been rumors in the organization about Chris having a relationship with one of the employees. Kelly Cochran was the employee with whom Chris was rumored to be in a relationship. Kelly was a married woman who had a difficult home life. Kelly had told co-workers about her husband's volatile temper and multiple threats to her. She appeared to be dissatisfied with her marriage. Chief Frizzo was aware that she needed to speak with Kelly and her husband. Kelly and Jason Cochran lived in Iron River, Caspian, a nearby town near the Caspian Pit, an old abandoned mine. Kelly appeared willing and eager to speak with officers when the police department first made contact with her. Jason, on the other hand, was more aloof and appeared nervous. Frizzo stood outside the room as the Michigan State Police interviewed the couple. Kelly admitted to having an affair with Chris Reagan. Her husband, she claimed, was aware of the relationship. She stated that she last saw Chris on October 14, when the two went out to dinner. She stated that she had called and texted him several times since then, but he had not responded. He seemed irritated with her for refusing to relocate to North Carolina with him. Jason, who was interviewed separately, confirmed that he was aware of his wife's sexual relationship with Chris Reagan but had no knowledge of Chris's whereabouts. Jason explained that he was on disability due to health issues. He claimed that after his body failed him, he could no longer perform sexually. To keep his wife, he agreed to turn a blind eye while she had affairs. He was aware of at least 2 men whom his wife was seeing. Kelly admitted in her interview that she was having an affair with an Oldenburg co-worker who worked under Chris's supervision. Eric, the other man Kelly was seeing, was the next person interviewed. He admitted to being in a relationship with Kelly. He had the impression she and her husband were divorced. He told investigators he was getting tired of Kelly because she would stop messaging and communicating with him for days at a time, then reconnect hot and heavy. He was fed up with the relationship. Could this be a motive for Kelly's other lover's murder? Kelly was asked about the park and ride where Chris's car was discovered during her interview. She denied knowing anything about it or the surrounding area. Eric, on the other hand, was able to prove that was a lie. Investigators learned that he and Kelly frequently met at the park and ride to have sex at a nearby lake. Eric had an alibi and agreed to take a lie detector test, which he aced. At the time, he was ruled out as a suspect. By December of 2014, Michigan State Police had determined that Chris Reagan had gone missing of his own volition. They assumed he committed suicide or left to start a new life somewhere else. The MSP did not believe Chris Reagan wanted to be found, and adults are free to leave at any time. They no longer wanted to invest precious resources in the investigation. Laura Frizzo, on the other hand, was determined to find Chris Reagan. She had a strong suspicion that Kelly and Jason Cochran knew where he was and were involved in the wrongdoing. While she advocated for Chris, the city of Iron River and MSP reduced their support and resources for the investigation. Laura Frizzo had spent many hours attempting to question Jason and Kelly Cochran by March of 2015. They agreed to speak with her on several occasions, but never admitted to any involvement in Chris' disappearance. Jason had explained that he had severe anxiety, a mental health problem, and had spent time in a mental hospital in the fall of 2014. He was nervous and eventually stopped talking to Frizzo, requesting a lawyer. Kelly had been caught in a number of lies, but none of them proved her involvement in Chris' disappearance. She didn't appear to be as worried as her husband, but Frizzo was certain they were both involved. The lies had begun to pile up, providing probable cause for a search warrant of the Cochran residence. The Cochrans visited their neighbors while the search warrant was being carried out in their home. Frizzo, MSP, and private investigators discovered blood spatter on a painted-over ceiling inside the home. They also discovered firearms, knives, and a baseball bat in the house. They were unable to locate Chris Reagan, but Frizzo hoped that the blood splatter evidence would be proven to be Chris's blood. However, the blood had been tainted by cleaning agents and paint and could not be used to extract DNA. In fact, the lab was unable to determine whether the blood was human or animal. The search warrant, on the other hand, frightened Jason and Kelly. They vanished the next day. Fortunately, the private investigators assisting with the case had installed a GPS tracking device on the vehicle, which informed Frizzo that the couple was in Indiana. They returned to their hometown. Frizzo was convinced they were fleeing an impending arrest. Unfortunately, the evidence at the house was insufficient to arrest the couple. It was, however, sufficient to obtain a DNA warrant. The neighbors who had sat with the Cochrans while the house was being searched had information they thought Frizzo should know. The neighbors, a man and his nephew, told Frizzo that their grandmother heard what she thought was a gunshot coming from Kelly and Jason's house around October 14th. They claimed that after that night, Jason and Kelly were frequently using power tools to remodel their home in the middle of the night. They didn't give it much thought until Chris Reagan went missing. What they said next sent shivers down Frizzo's spine. The Cochrans had always been cash-strapped and barely scraping by. Jason did not work, and despite Kelly's multiple jobs, the couple had limited resources. However, in the days following Chris's disappearance, the couple had invited them over for dinner and barbecues several times. They described the couple serving a massive amount of meat, something they had never done before. They claimed the meat was not hamburger and that Jason claimed to have worked as a butcher with exotic meats. The neighbors now believed they had been served Chris Reagan's cooked remains. Kelly and Jason were now back in northern Indiana, where they had grown up. They were close to family and friends. The county police department worked with Frizzo and Iron River to obtain DNA swabs from Jason and Kelly Cochran. Despite the fact that the DNA was successfully obtained, the couple refused to speak with Frizzo. Around the middle of October 2014, another of the couple's former neighbors stated that Kelly and Jason were burning something foul-smelling in a fire pit behind their house. The neighbor explained that he had burned rubber and other materials before, but nothing smelled as bad as what the Cochrans were burning in a barrel in October 2014. The burn pit in their backyard was discovered, and the burn barrel was extracted from the Caspian pit. A burnt saw blade and metal parts from a pair of jeans were discovered inside the burn pit. They were unable to establish a direct link between either of them and Chris Reagan. Additional searches of Jason and Kelly's former home turned up a rabbit's foot. Terry confirmed to Frizzo that it was Chris Reagan's. There was more evidence that Kelly and Jason were involved, but nothing definitive. They also discovered a notebook containing a story written by Jason. The story depicted a main character who was a psychopathic murderer, similar to Jason. More circumstantial evidence, but no conclusive evidence. Despite the lack of support from the city and state, Laura Frizzo continued to dig and search. Kelly Cochran called 911 on the 20th of February 2016. Her husband was barely conscious, turning blue and vomiting. The first responders attempted but failed to resuscitate Jason Cochran. He was no longer alive. Jason Cochran's autopsy revealed that he had massive doses of heroin in his system, enough to kill him. He did, however, have petechial hemorrhaging, indicating that he had been smothered. His death was determined to be a homicide. Jeremy Ogden, an Indiana detective, was assigned to the case. Kelly Cochran was interviewed about the day her husband died. She claimed she awoke to him not snoring, as he usually did, at which point he began vomiting and turning blue. She told several stories that contradicted each other in terms of specifics. Kelly Cochran, according to Jeremy Ogden, murdered her husband. He also communicated with Laura Frizzo. Ogden and Frizzo began to collaborate. Kelly developed a trusting relationship with Jeremy Ogden. Then he pushed Kelly with some old-fashioned police deception. Jason's friend had come forward and agreed to work as a confidential informant for the FBI. He believed Kelly was to blame for Jason's death and wanted to assist. The documentary Dead North on Investigation Discovery shows footage of a phone call between the informant and Kelly. According to the informant, Jason sent him a letter before his death and told him to send it if anything happened to him. According to the informant, the letter was addressed to the Iron River Police Department. Kelly's response was telling. "Please don't," she said. Kelly eventually agreed to speak with Detective Ogden out of fear of being caught. She claimed to have knowledge of what happened to Chris Reagan. She would tell the detectives bits and pieces over time, while also telling outright lies. Chris, she claimed, paid her a visit on October 14, 2014. She vividly described having oral sex with him and then having intercourse. She claimed that Jason shot Chris Reagan while they were having sex. She claimed Jason was the aggressor, and she had no idea he was even at home. She claimed she was afraid of her husband, who made her clean up after dismembering Chris's body in front of her. She led cops to a county road and a remote area in the woods where she claimed Chris's body parts were dumped. Initially, they were unable to locate any remains. Kelly appeared to be teasing the investigators once more. She eventually led them to an area where police K-9s discovered a skull. Chris Reagan was positively identified. Chris Reagan's body had been discovered. Kelly then showed Detective Frizzo a pair of forceps she claimed she used to extract the bullet from Chris's head at her former residence. Chris Reagan's blood was found on the forceps. She told investigators that the motive was a pact she and her husband made on their wedding night. If either of them cheated, it was their responsibility to kill the other. Kelly Cochran was charged with murder in the death of Chris Reagan in October 2016, along with other charges related to the crime. She turned down multiple plea deals and chose to go to trial. She was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of first-degree murder. Kelly was also charged with Jason Cochran's murder. She pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 65 years in prison, to run concurrently with her Michigan sentence. She confessed to injecting him with heroin before strangling him. Kelly continued to tell a variety of stories that shocked authorities after her arrest. Kelly's brother stated in a recording shown in the Dead North documentary that Kelly may have killed many more people in the past, in addition to her deceased husband. Both allegedly had numerous affairs and are suspected of murdering at least 9 people and feeding their remains to organic pigs they raised in Indiana. Kelly later implies that she was the mastermind behind the murders of her husband and Chris, describes herself as a psychopath, and expresses no remorse for her actions. "Kindness is not in my DNA," she says. Kelly tells her mother in an audio clip from the documentary that she is a serial killer and believes she was born that way. Laura Frizzo was reenacting the discovery of Chris Reagan's skull for the documentary Dead North when the camera crew discovered another bone. While filming, Chris Reagan's lower jawbone was discovered. Laura Frizzo appears shaken in the documentary and sobs on camera. Chris's family and friends finally got the closure and justice they deserve thanks to the efforts of Laura Frizzo and Jeremy Ogden. Despite the fact that the case of Chris Reagan's disappearance had been closed, Laura Frizzo was fired as the police chief of Iron River. Due to irreconcilable differences, the city manager fired her in December 2016. Laura Frizzo, on the other hand, is certain that it is because she refused to back down in the case of Chris Reagan and because the city manager discriminates against women. Laura Frizzo found love despite her professional setbacks. She and Jeremy Ogden met and fell in love while searching for Kelly Cochran. They're still together today. Meanwhile, Kelly Cochran is being held at the Huron Valley Women's Complex by the Michigan Department of Corrections. She is very likely a serial killer, having committed at least 2 murders. Kelly is an expert manipulator, pathological liar, and self-proclaimed psychopath. Laura Frizzo will never be free again because of her tenacity. What do you think about the Kelly Cochran's case? I really appreciate your feedback. Thanks for watching.